Welcome back to another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Patrick Lyons, and I'm here with my friends and colleagues and co-hosts, Patsy Freeman. Patsy, welcome to you.
Hey, Patrick, glad to be here.
And today's host, Leb Tannenbaum. Leb, welcome to you.
Good to have you. Patrick.
Yep. It'll be fun watching you navigate us through, kind of lead us through today's episode. You have two extraordinarily special guests that I will turn it over to you to introduce.
Well, I'm in total agreement with that. So the guests today are Patrick Lyons. He is leading the effort at Culture by Design. We have worked together for years, and he is doing incredibly good work with clients, I guess, basically all over the country now. So welcome, Patrick. And Patsy Freeman, longtime friend, great professional, taking on a really exciting project right now. And all of this with New Legends Now, we'll get to that at the end of the program. Our topic today is around strategic execution. And we know that, and it's well known if you read anything about execution related items, that it does frustrate CEOs. So to our listeners, to CEOs, to leaders who have put a lot of work perhaps into a strategic plan, only to find that executing that plan is not it's not a piece of cake. It's not necessarily a straight line from one thing to another. That's going to be our topic today. And, I'd like to kick it off by just maybe asking Patsy. Patsy, you had shared with me earlier how you view, one element of this topic is that execution is a discipline. And just thought, well, let's start there. Let's explain that a little bit. Let's talk about the word discipline. And for you who are listening, you might start to be thinking about your interpretation of that word and how disciplined your organization might be.
Thanks, Leb. So execution, strategic execution is outside. And Patrick, I know this is one area that you really are great at differentiating outside your operational planning. So it is in addition to your operations, your daily, the way you daily do your business. So it is a add-on that I've seen over and over again. A lot of people don't know how to, first of all, add another layer on, much less think about it through a strategic lens, which we'll get into in a minute. So around discipline, it's creating a consistent rhythm and process for how do we address our top strategic priorities? How do we push those down into the organization so that the people that are doing the day-to-day work are the ones that have the input in what needs to be done and are actually doing the work?
Very good. So let's explore some of the words that you just said. Consistent. I heard consistent. I heard rhythm.
Yes.
Right. I heard process. Let's talk a little bit about. I know we use this when we do simplified strategic planning. Let's talk a little bit about meeting rhythm. I think especially since the opening of the pandemic, which is we're almost at the 2-year mark. I guess if we started from February, that wouldn't be, we'd be at the 2-year mark. Let's talk a little bit about how this discipline relates to meeting rhythm. Because I think with remote work, hybrid work, some in the office work, that's become a pretty hot topic.
Yes, a lot of people are probably rolling their eyes saying, we really need one more meeting.
Exactly.
So the day-to-day work of executing gets done on a consistent basis. So a lot of organizations do meeting rhythm quarterly, kind of evaluating. So that on a higher level is how are we doing on our overall strategy? I think to really integrate the strategic learning and embed it into the organization, you're looking at at least a monthly regular rhythm of how are we doing on executing on our strategy?
Hmm. Patrick, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's a good target to shoot for. And Patsy, I think you nailed it when you said that a listener's probably thinking, yeah, we don't have time for it. I mean, another meeting. And yes, it is. It's an add-on. Like that's such a great word that you said that you used. It's an add-on, and if we don't think of it that way, then then I think we then our ability to execute strategically is going to be hampered. It can't be part of the operations. That monthly rhythm. I think why people typically why leaders and organizations typically don't want meetings is because of how their experience in meetings, right? We go around the table and we all do our check-in, and if I don't have anything to check in about, I have to make something up because I don't want to be the only one who says it's kind of business as usual. And when I'm doing my check-in, because it's typically about my organization, everybody else at the table might be paying attention, but they kind of tune out. Like those and they become operations meetings instead of focused on the strategy. That's not what I don't think that's what we're talking about. Patsy, I don't think that's what you're talking about, adding that monthly meeting.
That's
For
correct.
me, right? For me, that monthly meeting that I would have with my clients is really focused on strategic execution. So in that meeting, we're touching on the key elements of the strategy. We're asking what's new information that we have, what's changed, does our strategic plan need to be adjusted? We're looking at we're definitely checking in on the rocks, on those key initiatives that are right in front of us. We're not trying to solve all of those issues in that monthly meeting. We're trying to identify what are the issues that are keeping us from executing, who owns that, and when can we expect a report back, or when can we expect some movement on that issue, and then we might have a conversation about what help would that rock owner or that task or initiative owner need to remove the obstacle. But we're not trying to solve everything in that meeting. It should move at a good pace, not get so down into the weeds that people start checking out. And it really should be focused not on the day-to-day, but on the strategy. And with that as kind of a context, monthly is a good time. It seems to be a good rhythm to come together and have that conversation.
Okay, so let me put you on the spot a bit.
Okay.
Right. A lot of organizations we work with call their strategic planning meeting a strategic planning meeting, and we walk in and it's an operational meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of an annual operational exercise that everybody does, and we'll add 3% to the top line here, and we're going to take out this division here, which is going to make us the bottom line a little bit, and on and on. But it really is more of an operational meeting. So you're talking about strategic execution. Can you give us some examples of what makes it strategic? What are we talking about that's going to help our listeners understand, oh, I've actually really never languaged the strategy behind this operational, and these tasks that we're giving out to each other?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think what you described is one of the bigger problems or inhibitors of a quality strategic plan, is that it really starts with where are we today, and let's just based on what we're seeing in the industry or pressures we might be getting from the board or from wherever, or just our own internal benchmarks. We want to go up 5%, 10%. We're going to set a stretch goal of 15 or 20%. Versus a strategy is working backwards. Forget where we are for the moment. It's right. Jim Collins, Good to Great, starting with the end in mind. What trends are we seeing out there that potentially create opportunity for us today? Right. So just go back to the beginning of the pandemic era. A trend was everybody's going to be working virtually. Okay. That's a trend. You can't just say you can't go back to that business 2 years ago and say we're just going to try to maintain status quo, or we've got to figure out how to grow 5 or 10% in this pandemic era. It's how do we do things differently based on that trend. The trend now of less stickiness employees, right? Employees are more, they're less, I don't want to say loyal, but they're more likely to leave if they're not happy where they are. That's a trend. The AI is a trend. There are all these trends. Let's get those on the board and figure out how does our business need to look 5 years from now based on these trends. What do we need to do? If we could blow it up and start over, it's starting backwards and then working our way in, as opposed to just starting with where we are and incrementally adding a little bit here each year for the next 3 to 5 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think maybe we can even get closer to some of the illustrations. So I'll give an example of something that we've been working on with the company together, Patrick, and maybe kick it right back to you. So everybody knows that transportation became an issue if you're relying on shipping and you're relying on trucking, and the the escalation of costs was just wild, right? You can talk about operationally where we might need to do something differently, or cut back, or consolidate, or whatever that might be. But the question, I think, in a strategic planning meeting is, what's our transportation strategy for this year? Knowing that we're facing some pretty tough issues, or we know there's been all kinds of global supply chain issues, and there are certain things that we thought we could get easily that might be pretty hard to get. What's our strategy, and then how are we going to execute on that? I'm looking for you to maybe share a little bit more so that people can see it goes beyond. It is really an add-on. It is not just operational, it's following an operational plan.
So you're looking for a specific example from if I go through the kind of list of the current folks I have. It's a good question.
Well, let's look, and Patsy,
Yeah.
jump in on this, because especially with the the client, one of the larger clients you're working with right now, we all know that people have been leaving industries, leaving their job, right? It gets written about, and then you're in a meeting in December of 2021, you're planning for 2022, and you've got to be talking strategically about, how do we retain the talent that we have, or how do we get the talent that we need, right? And you can't just operationalize that and say, okay, we're going to go out, we have to hire 40 people, or we have to hire 400 people. That's the target. Let's go do it. We have to talk strategically about what we're facing. How does that, what's in our industry, what makes us attractive.
What is the majority of the workforce looking for?
Exactly.
As the workforce
That's what I'm looking for, Patsy.
dynamics change.
Right.
So as people leave, real transparent exit interviews become really important, because
Right.
you find out that maybe people wanted a career development plan and you didn't offer that, or so that's what I'm seeing, especially with younger workers. I have a different focus than traditional people who've been in the marketplace longer. Like a lot of the millennials are looking for purpose.
Yeah.
They want their work to be meaningful.
Right.
So that's some examples of, those are some not new trends, but that's an example of paying attention to trends as you start to design strategically what you want to have available for your workforce.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. That's what I'm trying to flush out here,
Right.
Together. Right. So then it can also, you peel that back and you can say, geez, are we on purpose with our purpose? Have we talked about it enough? Do people even understand what we care about? Knowing that this younger generation wants to know about that. They want maybe something that they can connect to personally because they are concerned about climate change, or they love the environment and they want the environment to be improved, whatever the case may be. That to me then starts to lead us into what are we talking about between operational and strategic execution? Okay, well, let's keep going, but let's keep thinking about that, and as things come up, something might be there might be some other examples. So if we're not just tasking, we're talking about also like systemic process work, and let's talk a little bit about that as it relates to strategic execution. How do you get to, especially if you're a CEO, how do you make sure that some of the systemic processes, or at least the investigation of our processes, leads you to success in your strategy? Right. So
Got any ideas on that, Patrick?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
I'm not sure I do either.
Okay. Well, let's talk about change management as an example.
Great.
Right? Okay. So we know things are changing, right? We know we've been in the last 2 years in constant change. Have we systematized any process that helps us strategically execute, knowing that we're in volatility, that we're in constant change? What's our change process? I was trying to get to some of that. Right. How do you get that on the table? We're all in those meetings. How do you get that on the table where people start saying, oh yeah, systemically we've always, here's the other part of the language that might be helpful. We've always done it this way.
Right.
How do you stop the meeting and say, is that, what are we talking about?
Well, yeah. Patrick, I know you are quite adept at guiding your clients around this issue, especially asking them the question of like, how's our culture doing? How's our people doing? It's less about trends and it's more about, let's take the pulse of the organization. Is that what you're talking about a little bit, Leb? It's like, let's see how we're actually living our values and how is this change affecting that? Yeah.
I mean, systemically, culture, strategy, the way we execute, the way we work together, the way we communicate, all of those to some degree represent some element of systemic process that's causing us to either be successful or maybe fall short.
Well, one component that I see a lot, at least the need for a lot, which leads to frustration at the CEO level, starts at the frustration in the workforce, and that the change that's coming in alignment, as we're talking about here around the vision, doesn't get communicated down through every level of the organization. And it can often look like, oh, here's something else that's rolling downhill, but it never quite makes it to us. So you're kind of always in anticipation, wondering how it's going to affect you. And you never really get to that point. So clearly communicating that this add-on series of efforts is in alignment with the direction of the organization, the vision, it's in the future, it's how the company is going to make itself better. And therefore that better is going to affect everybody in the organization.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one systemic, how you actually communicate it down. Because then people can see their place. They can see how what they're doing on a daily basis contributes, and how contributes to the organization, and how the organization's contributing to them.
Yeah. Thank you. I get that.
Yeah. So when I think about, so I think I not come at it differently. I look at it a little differently than what the question you might have been asking, Leb. Patsy, I think communication plays a critical role in strategic execution, obviously. I think I find most of the clients that I work with, you probably feel the same way. they know what, I mean, if you include everybody in the company, they know, they have a good sense of what's working and what's not working. Um, very often they're stuck in doing things the way we've always done it. You alluded to that earlier, Leb. So to me, one of the ways to unlock the potential of that organization is to create the kind of environment, help them create the kind of environment where everybody's feedback is being provided, where the input is being provided, where it's being asked for and listened to, and where they can challenge the status quo, where they can challenge the sacred cows, they can challenge the way we've always done things. And sometimes that means helping a leadership team or a CEO understand, hey, change does not have to dishonor the past, right? Just because we're needing to do things differently today doesn't mean that the way you were doing it to this point was wrong. It probably was exactly what you needed it to be to get you to where you are today. And now there's a new landscape, right? The landscape has changed. The market has changed. The employees have changed. What employees want, Patsy, to your point, what employees want has changed. So it was the right strategy, the right approach to get you here. And it may not necessarily serve you well to get you where you want to go. That requires that leadership team listening more and engaging everybody in in the problem solving. As I said, so very often the employees at all levels know what's working, what's not working. What they don't feel all the time is the ability to raise those concerns and those questions. And I think when those questions and those concerns and observations get raised, that's the data that when you're sitting with a leadership team, that's the data that you can point to and say, okay, well, so how can we do this differently? Because clearly what we're doing today is not working for the employees, for the customers, for top line, bottom line.
Okay. So when we were talking before we started the podcast, we talked about that strategic execution stems from and starts with leadership.
Yes.
So let's talk. Let's hear some of your thoughts about that and how that might improve. What some of your suggestions are, and kind of what we're looking for, knowing that. And this is true of culture as well. We know from all the culture work that we do that leaders have the greatest impact on an organization's culture.
Right.
Not the only impact, but they have the greatest impact. Right. So if strategic execution stems from and starts with leadership, let's talk about it.
Well, to me, a lot of times when I'm talking with when talking with a CEO about strategic execution, a lot of times I like to frame the conversation. I like to spotlight the inhibitors to strategic execution. What gets in the way, right? Because very often these are the business problems that the CEO goes to bed at night frustrated by. It's what keeps them awake at night. Mm-hmm. And they know them as business problems, but they don't necessarily know that that's what's keeping them from executing their strategic plan. So the first inhibitor is what you just said. It's leadership alignment or lack of leadership alignment. A lot of organizations do strategic planning, but what they don't really make sure they have at the end of strategic planning, they have a strategic plan, but what they don't make sure they have is strategic alignment, which is that during the course of strategic planning, everybody who needed to say, who needed to provide input was able to provide input. Everybody who disagreed with the direction that's up on the board or being proposed was able to disagree. That we were able to have those difficult conversations. We were able to navigate conflict. Conflict isn't a bad thing. conflict is a great thing. Conflict tells me that you're invested. It tells me that it's important enough that you're going to fight about this, not fight, but you're going to, you're going to debate this topic. And so without that in the strategic planning process, you can come out with a plan and not have 100% alignment around that plan by your leadership team. Why is that a problem? Because then when you go to execute the plan, that's where resources need to start being allocated, right? That's where projects need to be prioritized. That's where maybe I have to make some sacrifices in my organization for the good of the larger organization to execute the strategic plan. And if I'm not fully aligned around that plan, I'm not going to be as open with my resources. I'm not going to be willing to take one for the team. I'm not going to, right? So you can't execute effectively. I hesitate to say you can't execute, period, but you certainly can't execute effectively without leadership alignment, because when the chips are down and we have to start implementing, that's where the chinks in the armor or the cracks in the chain will really show themselves if you don't have strategic alignment. So that to me is that's a non-starter.
Yeah, and there's another facet of that as well, in addition to resource allocation, is you want your senior team to have basically to be one voice for the vision.
Right.
Employees look to their senior executive teams to set the direction. They want to have confidence in that. So if you've got cracks in the armor, chinks in the armor, so to speak, and you don't have your top leaders all, in alignment with the same voice, the same vision, then it starts to get wobbly before you even get started.
You're exactly right. And that happens, right? Because
yes.
When a plan, when we're attempting to implement the plan, to execute the plan, as it begins to impact the employees on the front lines, if it requires any sacrifice on their part, or this is additive, right? This is an add-on. So as it requires a little bit more work, a little bit more effort, as it requires me to change, you go back to the change management. If I go to my leader and I'm complaining about it or challenging it or even asking questions, if my leader says, yeah, I didn't agree with it either, like I didn't think this was a good idea, I thought that was stupid.
That happens?
I know. Only in a very small subset of organizations. But yes, but what is it? That is a symptom. That's the manifestation of a lack of leadership alignment. And now you've got, trust me, that's all that employee wanted to hear, so that he or she could not do what they were being asked to do that was uncomfortable. So I think it's a great point that you bring up, Patsy.
Mm-hmm.
And what were we talking about earlier, Patrick? We were talking about, depending on what report you read, 80 to 90% of organizations who even have a strategic plan fail to effectively execute on that plan.
Right.
That is a lot of, lost resources, goodwill, not making any progress, we could go on and on, just on what costs you to have a gap in your execution process.
So how do we test the readiness of the organization? What are your thoughts? We come in here, we have, perhaps a certain amount of data, but we're also trying to transfer all of the tools and knowledge that we have to the organization itself so they can run with it. What are some of the areas that readiness needs to be at a pretty high level in order to successfully strategically execute? Right? We've talked about alignment. So we've talked about strategic alignment, right? We've talked about the impact of leaders. Sometimes, so are you doing some leadership development work while you're doing strategic execution work?
To me, I think yes. Leadership development is a component of strategic execution, because when you come out of the room with hopefully leadership alignment, it still requires each of those leaders to understand how to cascade that vision down into the organization, how to cascade that message down into the organization, how to turn it into expectations, clear expectations, how to be able to assess their organization and determine what are the, not the immediate needs, but if this is where the plan is going, how can I look out 3 to 5 years and anticipate now what the workforce needs to look like? What does my workforce need to look like? And how do I begin today what's my strategy today to begin bridging the gap between where we are today and there? And, there are a lot of leaders who become leaders because they're great individual contributors. And we don't always equip them on how to lead, how to do all of those things, how to have the difficult conversations. So when I think about reasons why strategic, the inhibitors to strategic execution, a lack of strong leadership is right up there with leadership alignment. We can have leadership alignment in the room, but if there are weak links on the leadership team who can't carry that down into their organization and think far enough out, then that's going to impact our ability to execute.
Yeah, it makes me think of a company in the construction industry that had identified their top mid-level managers, which were going to cascade the message down. And a majority of them could not get out of an operational mindset, first of all. So they wanted to immediately solve problems. Likewise, leadership is all about influence. And they were put on a execution leadership team, and were really quite afraid of having to carry the vision, tell that story, inspire other people. And many of them just opted off the leadership team because they had never had to do that, nor did they want to learn. So it automatically starts to see there's a break, starts to be a real break in that cascading it down into the organization.
So, Leb, your question was about readiness. One of my favorite sayings about change comes from Ford Taylor, writer, speaker, consultant. And he says, change happens when the pain of change is less than the pain of staying the same. Right. So that's, and I say that, I repeat that in every engagement I have with every leader. Change happens when the pain of change is less than the pain of staying the same. And it's relative because each of us has a different pain tolerance for change. That said, usually the companies, my experience, the companies that execute the best are the ones that they're not lulled into a false sense of security by success. They're able to find that burning platform all the time. Why? Yes. Okay. Either things are not going well today, and therefore we're feeling the pain, and we're ready. We've got to do the change. We've got to do things differently. Or things are going very well, but we still know there are threats on the horizon. We still know that we can't rest on our laurels. You've got great stories about companies that were doing extraordinarily well and then rested on their laurels and completely missed new trends or threats to their success, and in no time fell from grace and went out of business.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, so maybe identifying trends is part of what causes strategic execution to be successful or not, and taking the time to understand what does that trend mean to us. Just really briefly going into one company, they were profitable and number one in their field, in their industry for 20 years in a row. And then they kind of fell off the table, and they didn't understand why they were no longer number one and why their margins were eroding and their profitability was eroding. And It's a great example for what we're talking about because the CEO and the leadership team were very operational. They believed, as a corporate belief, that no one can catch us and we know how to operate. And they did know how to operate, but they didn't have much going in the area of strategic thinking or trend identification. And a trend came and wiped out like a third of their profitability and their business because they not only did they not, I don't know for sure that nobody on that leadership team identified the trend, but this is even more dangerous. Even if the trend was identified, they weren't going to honor it. They weren't going to change.
Right.
We're number one. This is how we got here. This is how we're going to continue to remain number one. So I would say in terms of curiosity, it was not a curious organization. It was really not allowed.
Yeah, it reminds me of, and we've talked about this in other conversations, not in an episode. It reminds me of the impact that Uber had, or that ride sharing had on the cab industry.
Yeah.
Right. It's another good example. They just missed the trend. And I'm reminded of just a couple of episodes of this show ago when we had Dan Dennison on. He was talking about, he said, consistency is what got you where you are. The ability to execute your skills in operations, that foundation is what got you profitable. It's not what's going to create the next great product, right? You need that balance. You need both. You need consistency. You need the strong operations, and you have to have an eye. You have to have a foot or a whole body in that innovative, creative trend analysis, product development, listening to the market and customer area as well, or else you become, your business becomes impacted like the cab business was when rideshare came along.
Right. So we're talking about strategy identification. We're talking about strategic execution and from a plan, and we focused on leadership. Let's go to the middle. And Patsy, I know you do a lot of work with bringing up the middles, so to speak, right?
Yep.
So a lot of old complaints, whether they're myths, folklore, whatever, is that from the top is we've done our job, we've communicated to the middle, and that's where it gets stuck, or that's where it doesn't happen, or that's where, the spark doesn't light the fire. So let's talk a little bit about being in the middle.
Okay. Let's see. I think part of doing our job is not only with the vision and direction of the company, and then I'll get to your question, is actually setting some very specific, clear, strategic initiatives and goals, and only having like 3 to 5 of them, so that those goals then can be, again, to Patrick's point, cascaded or filtered down through the organization. And each department by department has to decide, or has to look at those 3 to 5 priorities and decide, is this applicable to my department? If it is, what can we do to further the strategy or these goals in our department based on the direction of the company? And then it goes back to the team I was talking about. You actually have to give your middle managers not only the permission to operate and to lead, you have to give them some resources about how do you think strategically? Because Patrick, you're right. So many of us have started by being individual contributors. That's what we've known. And then we're given, and because we show leadership, we're being put on a team to help execute, but we're not giving the tools. Execution's about, yes, looking out on the horizon. And most people don't think that way, don't operate that way. And if they do, even naturally, that hasn't been a part of their job. So giving them the tools and the resources they need to then be able to convey to not only look at what their day-to-day tasks are, but to bring in industry experts and to really value the opinion of the people that work for them. So it's a whole new set of skills,
Mhm.
hmm
in addition to giving them the space to do that.
Right. So it sounds like some of that is like headspace, not just physical space or task space.
It is. It's new skills and behaviors.
hmm
The person that was leading this group of, I think it was 15 mid-level managers, for this company, came back one day. He says, "I get it." He's only 3 of us on this whole group of 15 even know how to think strategically. It was like a big aha moment for him,
Yeah.
because he was expecting, because you get a promotion, you automatically know how to step into that. It's new territory.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things, one of the inhibitors to that, what you're describing is and I think you see it now with the pressures of more resignations and tighter budgets and nimbler workforces. It seems to me there are more working managers than I can remember. And it's hard enough even to lead when you are a working manager, let alone take that add-on of being strategic and anticipating where are we going a year from now, and how do I need to start thinking about that today, and what is my role in delivering this initiative or this strategic priority, this strategic rock. So when you talk about giving those mid-level leaders and managers the resources, is it penny wise and pound foolish sometimes to make teams so lean that all they really can do is operations? It's really all they have time and capacity to do is operations. And it's chicken and egg. It's like, well, we don't have the resources. We don't have the bottom line to, we don't have the budget to give them more resources, but because they don't have more resources, they can't be working on strategic priorities. And so where does that cycle end?
hmm hmm
Well,
So-
what you're talking about is you start to get into the execution process, and on your 30-day or quarterly reviews, that's one of the questions you have to keep asking yourself, isn't it? How are we balancing our resources with with our resources, basically? And are we expecting too much? Or are we expecting too little?
Mhm.
Do we have the
Mhm.
right, maybe not maybe, and one of the questions is, do we have the right people in those leadership seats?
Yes.
Because where we don't, if we're not equipping them, if we're not doing that important leadership development piece, then that's going to inhibit our ability to strategically execute.
Yes.
Right.
That's why it's an important piece of it.
So managers usually have X number of people reporting to them.
Mhm.
So let's talk about them for a minute. Let's call it the workforce. A lot of times the workforce is frontline. They may actually be they may be the ones that customers and clients actually interact with the most.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of the roofing industry. You can do everything well, and the client's excited, and they're going to get, say it's a large commercial building, they're going to get a new roof, and they're going to move in all this, important instrumentation, and everyone's excited. But what happens when the rubber meets the road? There's a crew of people who come out and start working on the roof. And they're the ones they see. They're the ones they watch work. They're the ones they see whether they clean up the site each day. They're the ones who might interact and be asked a question and come up with an answer, right? So what about the workforce people and the impact that they can have on strategic execution and where they might be frustrated? And I'm starting to hear you say and kind of envision that it's a dual communication channel.
Mhm.
Communicate up and be heard, and can you communicate down and be understood,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
So how do you encourage that when you're maybe starting with leaders or starting from the middle?
Well, one thing, I mean, when you were asking about organizational readiness earlier, two
Mhm.
pieces came to mind that I think apply here. One is, do we have an intentional culture?
Mhm.
And as part of that culture, valuing everybody's opinion, regardless of where they
Yeah,
are in the
that's
organization.
good.
And do we keep that alive? And then what are our core values? Because if we have clear core values and we're living our core values, then living our core values show up,
Mhm.
on the roof or in, in the management teams or in the senior leadership teams. It reminds me of when I was facilitating leadership development programs years ago. We had a client that was a manufacturing client, and they valued everybody's opinion. And some of the best suggestions that were strategic came from those frontline workers, came
Yeah.
from the workers that put the metal pieces together.
Yeah.
And I was in such awe that they, first of all, were empowered to speak up. And then somebody listened, and then many of those ideas got implemented. To me, that was a really great example of a really vibrant culture.
Mhm. That's great. Yeah.
I agree. I think I think of we go back to the inhibitors of strategic execution. Lack of leadership alignment, clearly one. Lack of leadership, period. Right. So just individual leaders not developed. To me, the third of that trifecta is a lack of a strong culture. Organizations that don't have an engaged workforce, that don't have a good solid culture foundation, the execution then of the strategic plan falls to the leadership team, right? And I know that's something that frustrates every CEO. The question for that CEO is how do you plan to execute without your people? So you've got to involve them in the process. Lev, that it's a great visual, that dual channel of communication. If my workforce isn't engaged, if I don't have a strong culture today, and we create a fantastic strategic plan without involving that workforce, it's a great strategic plan. It makes all the sense in the world. And there's even leadership alignment around it. When we go to roll that out to a disengaged workforce, or a culture that isn't what it needs to be or what it could be, it's not going to work. We're not going to have buy-in from the very people that we need to execute it. So you're almost better off engaging your workforce in the creation of maybe a plan that's not as great, but at least has buy-in from the people whose lives ideally you're going to make better by implementing this strategic plan. So I think that's why very often I know all three of us are in alignment on this. We always recommend doing a culture survey before we go into that strategic planning, strategic alignment process, so that we have the voice of the company, we have the voice of the people at the table with us. It's such an important piece of data that when we're creating the strategic plan and we're having those strategic alignment conversations, we're all on the same page about the landscape of the company. We're all like, the data is what it is. We can all see it. And then what part of our strategic plan will address the opportunities that we discover from that culture survey? Because if we don't, then when we go to roll this out, the employees are going to say, you know what? There's nothing in it for me, right? We're going to do this. It's going to make you guys happy. It's going to make, it's going to accomplish your goals and objectives, but I don't see my day-to-day getting any better. And it's just a missed opportunity. So there has to be that culture work, and it's not linear. That the culture work can be happening at the same time as strategic alignment, at the same time as that leadership development piece. But without that, then man, good luck executing a strategic plan without your people.
Yep. Really great point.
So you're in a meeting and you recognize that it's a leadership meeting, and you recognize that one or two of the leaders are not aligned.
Mm-hmm.
what do you do?
Hmm. Patsy, do you want to go?
No, you're
Okay. All right. Well,
You're the first one to say,
yes. Okay. All right. It's such a great question. Hopefully, and Leb, I learned this from you. So, maybe even turn it around and ask you. I'll answer the question partially and turn it back to you for the how. To me, if it's the first meeting, when I start working with a new leadership team, before we start having any of the strategic alignment conversations, before we start talking about the business or the culture, before we start trying to solve any of the business problems, we start with creating psychological safety on the team. We've got to set the ground rules. We've got to set the environment so that when there is a leader who's not aligned, when there's conflict that needs to be had, we've already set the environment to be able to address that. So that's in that first meeting. I mean, I fully expect that. I expect that lack of alignment in that first meeting. I expect it in the 100th meeting, because to me, it's a little concerning when every leader is always on the same page. It's like, okay, we're missing something. You want different perspectives, so you want to be encouraging it. The way I would address it is by going back to hopefully the environment that we've already committed to, that we created in the very beginning, and that's, hey, there is the right environment in this room for us to navigate through dissent, through conflict. So if you're not aligned, it's safe to say it. Jump in and say it. So Leb, I want to turn the question back to you and say, how do you, because I learned from you, how do you create that environment of psychological safety?
Well, that's a big question. I think one is you have to be intentional. You have to have some kind of conversation about how do we make it safe enough for anyone to responsibly say whatever needs to be said. Mm-hmm. We refer to some of that work as the safety net process. So you have to be intentional about psychological safety and giving it your best effort, and recognize it'll take some time depending on what kind of culture. There's also a lot of very valuable information in the culture survey that might help you frame it or give you some data that helps with setting that tone and that safety. I think another thing is important is to recognize there's a distinction between alignment and agreement, and some people think they're the same. They're not, right? Alignment means I may not 100% agree, or this is not a decision that I would have made, but once we make it, I'm going to line up and I'm going to communicate as if I'm as committed as the next person. I sometimes tell the story or use the analogy of, I remember when I first started to drive, it was an older car, and what's it like to drive a car that's out of alignment? It's hard. It's always pulling you to the left. You're like, trying to drive down the road. Well, and what's it like when you get the front end, new tires, and you get the front end aligned? It's like a totally different vehicle, and it's no different in business. But if you think alignment is agreement, there are going to be times you just don't agree. Yeah. And if that's okay, and you've had an opportunity to say, I wouldn't do this, but I'm lining up, I'll be aligned, and I'll take that message out as if we're unified. It's kind of that, one voice type alignment. So sometimes just drawing some distinctions and helping people understand, in this case, I can align with some things that I don't fully agree with. Yeah. I've had an opportunity to speak my voice and share why. And then we're going to go.
I think there's another distinction that we draw, and that's the difference between safety and comfort.
Yeah.
Right. So we talk about psychological safety, but that never means it's guaranteed to be easy or comfortable. conflict is typically inherently uncomfortable, but it's how we navigate through it that makes it it's a bridge building conversation or a bridge burning conversation. So when I see that lack of alignment, and a lot of times, sometimes you see it before you hear about it. You can see it in the body, in the unspoken, the nonverbal communication. And that's where pausing the meeting to make sure we're not running roughshod over whoever is perhaps not fully in yet, to create that space and encourage them, remind them that it's not going to be comfortable, but it is safe. And whatever you're thinking is important. It's an important piece of data for the rest of us to make sure that we're not making a decision that's really not best for the organization.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Well, and that points to the importance of having either a third party in the room, so somebody that is an unbiased listener, or somebody that has the ability to keep their own selves in check while looking at the group dynamics.
Yep.
Invaluable resource.
And when because I think we've all been in that situation where we've invited that person to interject, right? To share what they're thinking, and they've chosen not to, right? That's where the leadership development piece comes in. That's where then in the safety of a one-on-one conversation with that leader, you can work through, okay, so let's talk about how that went. What kept you from feeling like you could throw that out, right? And that's why the importance of leadership development, because I don't expect every leader to always do the right thing. That's no one ever does. But when you have those real life examples that you can take, okay, that didn't go great, let's unpack it so that next time you do feel like you can contribute and you do understand why it's so valuable for you to share what you're thinking. Yeah.
That's good. I mean, I think the other thing there is starting to recognize the value of a good question, right? You can ask the group or share based on what I'm observing. We're not quite really aligned enough to go out to the rest of the company with this.
Yeah.
And what might it take for us to get aligned, and just leave it in the room and see what sometimes people will step into that. Sometimes they won't. But the worst thing, and this is an old saying, but the leader thought everyone was aligned, and then they go out to execute and they go, where is everybody? I'm in front and I'm alone, or I got one or two people with me and I didn't see that coming. So maybe those questions weren't asked. Maybe that culture hasn't really allowed for some of that difficult conversations to happen. And maybe there has never been a third party in the room before who can observe and share and ask questions, and maybe ask questions that other people aren't quite ready to ask. But over time, right, you want to build up that safety, that psychological safety, so that people will recognize I'm uncomfortable, or my stomach's starting to get tight, or my shoulders are starting to get tight, but it's okay. I can ask this question, or I can question my CEO, or I can put out a different idea that cuts across the grain of what it looks like everybody's starting to agree with.
Right.
Yep.
Which gets into decision making, but we're focused on strategic execution. So we started out saying somewhere between 70 and 90% of plans don't actually do very well in terms of executing the plan, right? Maybe we should move over to some of the Let's Get Practicals. I've taken a lot of notes while we're sharing. Certainly share anything else. I don't want anyone to be what we call wildly incomplete. But how about we kick it around and see what we've got in terms of, and this is true for the Let's Get Practical is a part of every episode. We don't want to just talk through things and then leave people with, oh gosh, how do I take some action on this? Let's Get Practical is action oriented.
Mm-hmm.
So one of you want to kind of kick us off with some of the let's get practicals that you've noted. I've got a whole page full, but you're the guest. I'm the host today.
Patsy, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think which is one thing Lev brought up actually, is that we have to look at strategic planning / execution as a parallel or as an add-on component of your business to create the future you're committed to creating.
Mm-hmm.
And another one is it takes some very focused effort. So execution is a disciplinary process.
Yeah.
That includes cadence, everything from a cadence of meetings to do we have the right people who are ready to execute?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Another is, which isn't as tangible, is are we ready? Are we ready to do this kind of work? I think that's one of the toughest questions to ask, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
What's our readiness for doing this? I've got others, but I'll let you add, Patrick, and see what I need to fill in.
Okay. Leb, I like you use the word curiosity. So for a CEO, the reminder to stay curious and pay attention to trends. There are plenty of examples out there. If you miss a trend, it could potentially be a huge impact to your business. So you want to be rooted both in strong foundation, strong consistency in operations, but also pay attention, stay curious, and pay attention to the trends so you don't miss the product innovation. We talked about the importance of psychological safety, that if you really want strategic alignment, and I'd argue if you want a great culture, then work on improving the psychological safety that people need in the organization to respectfully and safely say whatever's on their mind. Otherwise, if you think about it, in fear-based organizations, typically innovation dies and no one takes risks and people hide their mistakes. And so if you want the opposite of that, then maybe take a look at the psychological safety in the organization. We talked about developing your leaders. I think developing not just the senior leaders to equip them, but Patsy made a great point about the mid-level leaders as well. If you really want strategic execution, you've got to lean on your leaders, which means you've got to equip them with the skills, the tools, and the resources they need to be successful. So we talked about the difference between safety and comfort. Maybe that's an add-on to the psychological safety before that. Just recognizing safety doesn't mean it's always going to be fun or easy, but we're not shooting for comfort. We're shooting for a place where people can say what needs to be said. And the last one, and we didn't talk about this in the episode, but when I think about inhibitors to strategic execution, something that I know we do with our clients is have one central repository, one central place for all of the strategic tasks, all of the, have, whether it's having a scribe in the room or someone who's capturing all the tasks, all the commitments, the owners and the dates. Because what happens usually in those meetings, everybody writes their own on their own pad. And I don't remember what anybody else wrote. And if no one else does theirs, I'm relying on my memory or their honesty to raise that. And so it's just so much better to have one central place where we're capturing all of that, so that not to hang somebody for missing a date, but just so that we don't lose the things we said needed to happen in order to execute our strategic plan.
Well, you're talking about an accountability muscle, which is a really important muscle not only for strategic execution, but
Yes, and I think people need to see that accountability doesn't need to be punitive,
right.
right? That it's just
Mhm.
it's not about beating anyone up. Like we've already recognized, Patsy, you eloquently said this is an add-on. So I'm taking these tasks on over and above what I have to do on a day-to-day basis. It's not about feeling like I have to come in and make something up, excuses for why it didn't get done. Great, here's a new date. But in the absence of that one central place, we lose momentum on execution.
Excellent.
What do you have?
I'll add a few. One is just work on gaining psychological safety. Do the work. Another is, limit the number of strategic initiatives. Three to five is usually about as much as an organization can really truly deliver on. And we've certainly walked into places where there are 12 or 15. So that means there's some work to be done. I really like, especially, and have used a lot during the last 2 years, identify what's in our control and what isn't.
Oh.
And that can be corporately, organizationally, that can be from, a leadership level, that can be a team level, and that could be from an individual level. That can be really helpful. Identify owners of strategic initiatives.
Mm-hmm.
And the distinction there is that the owner is not necessarily the doer. They just own it.
Right.
They're going to make sure that that's going to happen, and do that in a really positive way. I like when Patsy talked about purpose. So, if you need to re-ask the question, what's the why for us? Why do we exist? What is our purpose here? Because it's important, especially to some of the younger workforce, but it really should be important for all of us. And if that's diminished, if that's changed, if that's somehow needs to be refreshed or spoken about more frequently, then do it. I like, Patrick, when you said change does not dishonor the past. So we have a past. And things need to change, and things were forced upon us over the last 2 years, where we just had to deal with a lot of change. I think the last thing for me is literally invite difficult conversations. Don't just wait for them to happen. Invite them, because strategic excellence in execution relies on it.
Yeah.
So we will, as always, compile the Let's Get Practicals and be offering them to any of our listeners for every single episode. Patrick, I'm going to hand it off to you to kind of do some of the brilliant closing work that you do, and we'll carry on.
All right, so Patsy, if someone is interested in learning more about you, working with you, engaging you for strategic execution, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Yeah, I would love that. They can reach me at Patsy, Patsy, at New Legends Now, and that is NEWLEGENDSNOW.com.
Okay. And Leb, you, sir, if someone is interested in engaging you for help with strategic execution or creating that, you said investigating psychological safety, inviting conflict, all things that you are great at, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Well, similar to Patsy, it's simply Leb, L-E-B as in boy, at newlegendsnow, all one word, .com. Or if you want to text or call, it's 503-706-1563.
Excellent.
And Patrick, how can people get in touch with you?
Yes, what a great question. Yes, so my email address is patrick@culturebydesign. That's the name of my business. So all one word, culturebydesign.com. And same thing, if you want to call or text, my phone number is area code 319-541-0488. I know each of us, this is an area that all three of us are passionate about. I know the two of you are exceptionally skilled at it, and I've learned from you. So yeah. So listener, thank you for indulging us. Thank you. Hopefully you got some good ideas, some good thoughts, and some great Let's Get Practicals, things that you can begin to implement tomorrow to start making inroads in the area of strategic execution. As always, we appreciate that you have visited with us for another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. You can download this episode and all past and future episodes at thefrustratedceo.com, as well as all of our Let's Get Practicals. And if you like the show, please do so. Please like and comment on whatever podcast platform you're listening. You can contact all three of us with ideas or suggestions for future shows, or just let us know what you're doing in your business.
Guests.
What's that?
Or future guests.
Or future guests. Absolutely. In fact, if you know of a future guest or you would like to be a future guest,
yeah,
by all means, reach out and let us know. If you can help us address the issues that keep CEOs awake at night, then there's a warm seat here waiting for you. Thank you to both of you. Leb, thanks for being our facilitator today. As always, great job. Thank you.
Yeah, lovely to have you.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for visiting, and we will see you next time on The Frustrated CEO.